Hello, just Jamie here. So this is going to be a full comprehensive guide on what parental alienation is, and I'm going to put the other attachments inside this video as well, such as CAFCAS, family court and solicitors. So what is parental alienation? So firstly, if you've been unfortunate enough to come across my video here, you might have a little understanding of what parental alienation is, so let's give it to you anyway. It's a serious, severe form of child abuse. So not necessarily physical abuse, but predominantly emotional, psychological child abuse. So that's parental alienation in a nutshell. If there was another word for parental alienation, it would be emotional abuse or psychological abuse. So let's not get confused with the physical abuse and the emotional. Now, we all know that emotional and psychological abuse is by far a more worse and severe form of punishing someone. So let's just stick in that area at the moment, the emotional and psychological impact it has on a child, or indeed a parent who's been alienated, in other words, taken away from their children.
This is a shocking but sadly not a unique case. A father has been barred by a judge from seeing his children because his ex-wife, the children's mother, spent years demonising him in front of them, ultimately turning them against their father. So what can be done to stop so-called parental alienation? What do you think on this, Jane?
Oh, well, I've written a lot about this over the years. It's a real bugbear of mine, how secretive the family court system is. So what happens is that people go into this sort of system and everything is kind of shut down and kept secret. So you can't ever really get to grips with what you're dealing with. And it means that it's not really open to criticism. And this particular case today, this is very similar to someone I know who's had exactly the same situation, who has been prevented from seeing his children now for 7 years. And as far as anybody can make out, there's never been any evidence as to why. He ended up in this situation in court, and the judge, in the same way as this judge, apologised to him and said, "You should not have been alienated from your children, but I'm really sorry, there's nothing I can do about it because they've been so poisoned against you that we now can't force them to see you." Now, that is a broken down system because these children, their lives are being wrecked. Yeah. You know, it's not great for the absent parent, hate that word. They're not, you know, some absent parents are absent by their own choice, but a lot are described as absent when they don't want to be. And I'm afraid it is predominantly men as well.
It's like the man is considered guilty until proven innocent.
It's a very mother-centric system.
So a little while back, maybe going about a year ago, I did a lot of research and I was putting together a film at the time to do with alienation, parental alienation, child abuse. So at the time I was interviewing a lot of people and I determined it's not actually exclusive to the UK, England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, but it's actually a global problem. So in other words, it's an epidemic. And there's a hell of a lot of this going around the world. Now, the reason it's not mentioned very often, probably 5% of the time, is that a lot of this type of thing is the family court closing people down. You're not allowed to discuss a lot of things. According to my research, bits and pieces I picked up about a year ago, the problem is with parental alienation and the reason, the catalyst behind it, which causes it, I think the majority of it and the majority of researchers suggested that it was down to the child abuser's upbringing. So say, for example, your alienating parent, your ex-partner has alienated you. I think it's safe to assume that they've had a very, very toxic and abusive upbringing.
When you're talking about severe cases, almost always, the almost is important there. And when you're talking about moderate alienation or moderate alienators, then I would say most of the time the parent has some type of a personality disorder. There's significant psychopathology there. Usually when you're dealing with alienation, it's one of three types or a combination: borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder or some type of a sociopathic personality disorder. And they're not mutually exclusive, those personality disorders, so one can have all three or meet criteria for all three. That's another striking finding, but it's also important to keep in mind that those three personality disorders are associated as part of the core pathology with first being charming in most cases and second being manipulative. And I think there are three things that are not as well known as they should be about parental alienation and the phenomenon. And number one is that it's a form of child abuse. Number two, that it's a clinical problem. And in fact, in many cases, it's a medical problem because of the types of delusional thinking and paranoid ideation and things like that. And the third thing is that it is profoundly counterintuitive.
So like I say, this is just down to research and from the people I've spoken to in the past through interviews for the film I was working on. I think it is safe to say that a huge majority of these people who's child abusing were in fact abused themselves as children. Let's take for example, your ex-partner has had stepsisters or has got stepsisters. The child abuser's parent didn't allow that child to have a relationship with the other sisters by the other parent. So over time, over a number of years, that child, the child abuser, who's now alienating you, has been psychologically manipulated by the parent. They've been intoxicated with this thought process where she or he can't see the stepsisters or stepbrothers. So that is where it comes from, or that's suggested where it's come from. Like I said, this is going by my own independent research as well as academics and psychological research, which is widely carried out around the world. So one of the main concerns about parental alienation, child abuse, is the false memories. Now, the false memories is often called parental alienation syndrome. So it's this element which is the problematic element of all of it. So you've got a child who's, say for example, been left with the child abuser for X amount of time, X amount of years. Over time, and especially certainly at a very young age, left alone with somebody psychologically abusing them, will come to believe that that other parent has done this to them, they've done that to them.
Research has highlighted some of the most common ways our memories diverge from what actually happened. The Mall study highlights how we can incorporate information from outside sources, like other people or the news, into our personal recollections without realizing it.
So, as we know, children at a young age, their brains develop, and as the brain's developing, that thought is already in there. Brains grow, all sorts grow at a young age, and this is where it comes from. So if you ask an alienated child, say you're an alienated parent, if you've hurt them, they will quite consciously be very, very adamant that you have. You've hurt them, and that's why you can't see them. But if you dig a bit deeper into the issue and you specifically ask what it is you've actually done to them, that's where they will go blank. They go blank simply due to the fact that it's drummed into them. So as we know as adults that memories, you've actually got the memory. Say for example, when I was little, I got the memory of taking my first Commodore 64 off my parents for Christmas. I've got the memory. I actually remember it happening. So I would have been 8 or 9 years old, I think, at the time in the early 90s when I had that Commodore 64 or whatever. You've actually got the memory. You can remember typing on it. You can remember loading cassette tapes on it. You know, so you've got all these memories. However, if you ask an alienated child to express these memories a little deeper, you'll often find that they become very withdrawn. All they can say is that you hit me, you done that, you done this, you done that. But they don't actually have a context. They don't actually have what was going on at the time. All they seem to do is you hit me, but there's no memory there. So in that case then, that's how you determine if your child has been alienated, which is often the case. You'll hear kids from time to time, even on YouTube, there's alienated children who's now adults who will talk to you about this, or you watch the video and you can watch alienated children who suffered by the hands of a child abuser as a child talk about their experiences, what type of miserable life they had without the other parent involved. Further down the roads then, you're going to start realising that your children, if you've got anything to do with them, if they've not been completely alienated from you, you'll find their mental health deteriorates. So again, just like I was saying just now about research, that type of thing, through my own independent research and reading others' academics' research, psychological reports I've read in the past, you will see that children's mental health deteriorates, and this is simply due to the fact that they need the other parent. Anyone in the real world understands that two parents are they're needed by children. Just like as an adult, you need your both parents, regardless.
What exactly is parental alienation?
It's a family dynamic in which a child's been manipulated by one parent to reject the other parent who did nothing to deserve the rejection. It's a steady stream of negative messaging to the child that everything that other parent does is bad, wrong, stupid, contemptible, and an indication that the parent doesn't love the child.
Michelle Nyrider would tell people that she felt that her ex-husband was alienating the kids, and people tended not to believe her.
Sadly, many mental health and legal professionals are untrained. But even when a judge sees it, they don't know what to do about it.
You could see why that would be so damaging on the targeted parent, the parent whose kids are turning away. Is it also terribly damaging on the kids? I mean, why does this matter?
That's a great question. I started by interviewing adults who had this experience as kids. These are people who said to their parent, I hate you, don't ever darken my doorway again, I don't want to see you anymore. And it was stunning. They talked about a lifetime of depression and despair and anxiety and low self-esteem and shame. You know, what is this girl who participated in this murder of her mother? I mean, when she comes around, the pain that she's going to experience, the guilt and the shame. How could I have been so stupid? Why did I listen to my, father, that my mother was horrible? Why did I break my mother's heart?
Why did I help kill my mother?
My understanding of this case is that that two things happened to an extreme degree. One is she did not believe that her mother loved her, and the other is she was dependent on her father. And I think that she did what made sense to her, which was to preserve a relationship with a caregiving parent.
So mental health terms, we got a lot of things going on with children, such as depression, things loosely attached to depression, other problems which we don't really want our children to be grown up with having. Another one of the big things for parental alienation is obviously the contact blocking. So you might find, in some cases, that you're trying to get hold of your children's doctor's notes, their school records, to see how they're progressing in school. You might come across a point where somebody says to you, well, I'm not allowed to give you that. So this is where I'm going to mention parental rights. Regardless, if you're an alienated parent, make no doubt about it, you have got just as many rights as the child abuser, the alienated parent. So there's no difference. So they might even go down the route of telling the children that the other parent, the alienated parent, whoever, who can't see their children, don't have rights. They're not allowed to, so they don't live with you. So that's a very common one for child abusers to tell the children, is that you can't do this, you can't do that because you don't live with you. And then we can go down the custody route where children will constantly say stuff along the lines of you can't do that or you're not allowed to do that because you don't have sole custody. So again, it's a very, very common one for children to say living with the child abuser, the parental alienator. In the UK, you can check out your parental responsibilities and your rights. Just Google the Gov website if you're in the UK watching this. But yeah, bits and pieces like this. It's going to be for the UK only, obviously in America or Russia or wherever. You're not going to have the Gov, but you'll have your equivalent there. Another big part of parental alienation is the lying. This is a big one. I mean, let's face it, if you're watching this, you'll be able to see your children if it wasn't for lies going on in the background. So where do I start? Obviously, like I just said, parental alienation is infested with lies. That's how parental alienation starts. So you will find that you might have old friends turn against you. You might even have family on your child abuser side who you was very friendly with one day. All of a sudden, you're gone out of life and you start realising that people are stalking you, they're harassing you, they're saying they're going to beat you up for this and that. And you got to stop a minute and you got to think, where the hell is this coming from? Well, suddenly, it's obvious where it's coming from. Once one of these people mentions your ex, boom, you're done. You know where it's coming from.
Frequent situation. A couple breaks up and instead of keeping things civil for the children, one partner does all they can to turn the family against the other.
Often, the safety of the kids is used as a legitimate excuse to exclude one parent from being a part of the child's lives. But in many cases, that exclusion just isn't justified.
We're joined in the studio by Jan James, founder and chief executive of Good Egg Safety and a passionate campaigner on this subject. Jan, why do you feel so strongly about this?
Thank you. You just actually said that, some parents may be, held back from seeing their children for legitimate reasons. And if that were the case, it wouldn't be called parental alienation. If a child is being held back from a parent because the other parent is known to be abusive, then that would be called estrangement, and that would be perfectly right to protect them in those circumstances. What parental alienation means, and it's been much misrepresented in the media, as you'll have probably seen, is where a parent, without any justification, will psychologically manipulate a child to reject a parent. I think, the best place to start is Kafka's, who deal with 140,000 cases annually. And their definition is basically that, when a child's resistance and hostility towards a parent is not justified because they've been psychologically manipulated. But worse than that, and this is the reason I've got involved, is that the former chair and chief exec of Kafka's, Anthony Douglas CBE, described parental alienation as a deliberate manipulation of a child by a parent, and he said that it had become so common in family breakdowns. Kafka's felt that it was 80% of their most intractable cases was as big an issue as any other form of child abuse or neglect. And that's why I've got involved.
I was going to ask that question, how common is this? And you've already answered it there. I mean, what we're saying is you're weaponising your child against your partner. That's what we're saying here, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And it's a form of post-separation domestic abuse where psychological abuse and coercive control is at its heart. And it's devastating for children. I mean, I've spent a lifetime campaigning to keep children safe in cars and homes. And the psychological safety of children is critical too. And we've interviewed many adults who were alienated as children. And their stories are uniquely heartbreaking. They say the same things: suicide ideation, drug and alcohol abuse.
So this is the child grown up.
That's right.
They've got all of these issues because they had a stunted relationship, as it were, or a poisonous relationship with their family.
Absolutely. They've been told repeatedly that a parent could be a mother or a father, because this is not a gendered issue, no matter how many times we're told it, they've been told that that parent is unworthy, is unfair, is dangerous, has alcohol issues or whatever, and they grow up without that loved parent in their lives. You've got to remember that parental alienation is generally where the parent had a close loving bond before separation, and then subsequent to separation, that bond is severed, that attachment bond, not just with the parent, but also with a whole host of the family, grandparents, aunts, uncles, a whole half of their familial heritage.
So going forward, you're damaging their ability to have a relationship with somebody else. If you can't trust your nearest and dearest, and you thought they were there for you from birth, and then you can't, is this what you're? So it's a cycle of abuse.
And of course, it's not just the parents, is it? Because this affects grandparents as well, and and relationships with other relatives too.
It does. To answer your question, yes, absolutely.
Now, the lies can be anything from severe to, well, nothing to worry about. But unfortunately, in most cases of parental alienation, the lies can be extreme. Say, for example, if a child abuser wants to reinforce their idea that the children you don't see have been abused by you, hence that's why you're out of the picture, they will go through all sorts of great lengths to reinforce that idea, to get as many professionals on board to give them that idea that you're an abuser, regardless if there's no police reports or you've been found innocent of child abuse or whatever. There's going to be a lot of lies, and get used to it. If you're new to this world, get ready for a hell of a lot of lies. So different lies to reinforce ideas, such as telling professionals this and then telling that. Now, one way of catching child abusers out is simply by gathering SARS reports. So once you've got your SARS report, and again, this is likely exclusive to England and the UK, the SARS report you can get from GP, you can get it from schools, you can even get from CAFCAS, and I'm going to cover CAFCAS in a minute. So if you line up all these records, your SARS reports, which is a history of your child's medical reports, say, or school reports, you will find that there's no correlation or any consistency between what the alienating parent has said. On one side, we got, well, the other parent, the alienated parent, has hurt his child, but on the other report, the alienated parent didn't say that, the child said that. Lies, in its plenitude, get used to lies. To the point, which is where the false memories come from. So there's no substance, it's literally behind closed doors, so it seems that these lies are being generated. And without a doubt, to catch one of these people out, you get the SARS reports, and you'll find this along the way, you'll find that along the way. So good one, good tip to give you. So in a sense, talking about cults now, some people might find it a bit odd. Again, this is a bit of research I did about a year ago or so, where child abusers, emotional, psychological abusers, are known as cultists. So I used this example before, so I'm going to just go with the obvious, and I'm going to say Charles Manson. In the 1960s in America, he was a cult leader and he had a following. Charles Manson's idea was to kind of block his followers from the rest of the world's positive influences, whilst Charles Manson indoctrinated this false reality, this false sense of reality onto his followers. Now, if you know where I'm going with this, you can see there's an analogy there with a cult leader and one of these child abusers, is that they're both working from the same idea. They're blocking you as a parent and the rest of your family, which is often the case. You're all deemed as dangerous. And that's where the cult comes from, is that the blocking of outside influences, positive influences, is gone. So Charles Manson, alienated parents. I just want to get the cult thing out there. Like I say, some of you might see a similarity of that. You can see where that's coming from, that idea. Now, I'm going to just talk about the process of solicitors or lawyers if you're in America, or even in UK, some people say solicitors, lawyers. Also going to mention CAFCAS and the family court itself. So first of all, make no doubt about this, a solicitor is there strictly as a business. They're not your friend. And you could argue that the solicitors coming from the alienating parent side are nothing less than child abuse enablers. If you're an innocent person, that is, they're enabling a child abuser to take you away as a parent from your own children. That's what they're doing. So, truth be told, they're not likable people. They're robots. They're wooden people. with no empathy, no emotions for children's safety or well-being. So that's one thing I'm going to point out about family law solicitors. They are, I think it's safe to say, scum. Now, we're talking about CAFCAS. Now, again, if you're in the UK, you'll know who CAFCAS are. Without a doubt, they are the worst of the worst of the worst organisation around, I think, ever actually in the existence of humankind. They are the worst of the worst. So, mentioned this before, but if you just check Trustpilot reviews, or even your local area, your region where you're from, check your CAFCAS reviews, and I can guarantee you probably 99.5%, 99% will have negative reviews. There's a reason for that. It turns out CAFCAS staff are so overwhelmed by people to deal with that they barely read any evidence. And it seems that also, again, from research and from talking to people in this country during my own research, is that they tend to favour people who's actually got custody. They're promoting themselves with a framework of understanding parental alienation. So what they're missing seems to be identifying parental alienation. So if something comes out of your children's mouths, my dad's hurt me, done this, that, they won't specifically ask questions. They would take it as gospel that that child is being sense. He's talking sense, or she's talking sense. So meanwhile, you've got the alienated parent in the background who is saying there's parental alienation going on, this isn't right. Forget it. They will just forget about it, and they will favour the alienated parent without a doubt. Only in some cases, they might favour, if you've got a good CAFCAS worker, they might favour you and actually listen to you. So let's go on then about social services. Now, social services, it's known that a lot of CAFCAS officers, workers in social services, they swap between jobs and vice versa. So by the seams of it, social workers are not too much better than CAFCAS workers, and they're comparable with Nazis, apparently. Who knows? So the problem is with social services is that once they can get involved in your children's situation, by that point, a multitude of other professionals have been trained to also believe that things aren't right, you know, the absent parent, alienated parent, is this abusive fuck and all that sort of thing. And by that point, so many professionals are putting into this little place called social services all these negative thoughts and speeches about you. You don't stand a chance. So you might find that over time, your children, as I was talking about just now, might start rapidly declining with their mental health. So social services close your case, and that's often the case. They can't deal with it. The alienating child abusive parent won't do as he or she is told, so they close it down. Meanwhile, you've got all these services in the background coming together for what's called a child protection plan meeting. So this is one of the routes they can go down to reopen the case. So essentially, child protection plan is, say, where a parent is failing to do stuff. And this might also lead me back to the court thing, is that the alienating parent doesn't want outside influences. For example, if you've got a child or children going to school, the alienating parent does not want your children talking to these professionals. They like doing the talking themselves because they can talk on behalf of the children and actually tell them a complete opposite story of what the children actually want. So that's a crucial thing to actually go back to the court thing I was talking about a minute ago. So that's just one thing to remember, is that your parental alienators will drag that as long as possible. They will do all the talking for your children. And the point where your children are recognised as not being listened to, or the alienating parent does the talking for them, it's a little bit too late, because they've already been intoxicated with this nonsense, this false reality, these false memories. But like I was saying, these child protection plans is a consortium of people of different professions, the police, schools, GPs. They get together as a think tank, and they can't compare notes, and they see things aren't quite right living with the child abuser. So, like I say, that's just one avenue it can often tend to go down. Lastly, family court. So, my idea of family court is that it's not particularly a nice place, and from what I read and from what I heard, sometimes things might be dragged on for 10 years, and you're thinking to yourself, if this is going on for 10 years in excess of 2-3 years, what's going on? You go into your normal court, like a civil court, and it's done and dealt with within maybe a week, if that. However, this is why I'm talking about profiting solicitors, that type of thing. It's a money-making scam, and that's frankly what it is. So sometimes you might spend a couple of years in family court. Right at the end, the judge will side with the alienated parent who doesn't see his children, her children, that in fact we can see you have been alienated and your children have been turned against you. This is a problem. There is no consequence for the child abuser, the alienating parent. There's no consequences like that in family court. Only on rare certain occasions will it happen. So if I just finish off by saying, by no means, if you've been alienated and your children have been turned against you unnecessarily, remember one thing: you are far from a bad parent. The bad parent is the one falsifying these memories into young innocent children and making them hateful. And don't forget that most of you watching this, you're not going to be alone. It will likely be yourself plus your own side of the family who's also deemed as dangerous behind closed doors. You could even bring your friends into this, or whoever. But alienating parents, child abusers, they will often say that the alienated parent, whoever he might be, everyone he knows, everyone he deals with, everything he does is dangerous and is dodgy. Of course, there's no logic behind any of it, and there's no proof to support it, which goes further back to people stalking you, people who doesn't know you personally, have never known you personally. They will just carry on with it because they truly believe that you are what you're made out to be. I wasn't going to mention this, but I just had a thought. You've got something in psychology called the mirror effect. So the mirror effect is when the alienating parent has come across something, what you've done, and it's quite frankly nothing. It's just minor if you've done anything at all. But it's often the case where the child abuser parent has done that type of thing, him or herself, and they're kind of projecting that, they're mirroring it onto the innocent person. So that's called the mirror effect, and you might find in your own case that that's it. You will get blamed for everything, accusations being thrown about everywhere, and it turns out further down the route that, whoa, they've actually done that, and I'm getting the blame. So that's it. So in a nutshell then, if you're facing parental alienation, solicitors, if you're confident to represent yourself, represent yourself. Don't go down a solicitor route. I've read stories about people losing their houses, tens of thousands of pounds gone down the drain for no reason, because at the end of it, the family court likely won't side with you, especially when CAFCAS gets involved. They won't favour you as alienated parent. In fact, they will reject it. So that's about it. But just remember, the bad parent isn't the alienated parent. The bad parent is the loser who's doing this to you and your children. If you've come across this video, I know it's been a bit of a depressing one, but it might give someone a little heads up, for the research and this and that, what I've done in the background, to explain things a little more, to make sense of it. And of course, very lastly now, I can ramble on and on, very lastly here is that always keep your documents, your SARS reports. And if you want to know how to obtain those SARS reports, just drop a comment below and I'll send you links. So always remember, you are by far the worst of the parent. Yeah. Remember, it's the alienating parent, the child abuser, who's put you and your children into this world. So I hope I've helped someone, and if you want bits and pieces of information, research I've got over time, just drop a comment below and take care.